Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I suspect all around the world, many different time zones will be watching this. It's my very great pleasure to introduce and to begin this fireside chat with Masatsugu Asakawa, who is the president, of course, of the Asia Development Bank, and has very kindly agreed to join us for this conversation, which comes at what everyone will agree is an immensely critical time. I would like to start by drawing attention, of course, to the forthcoming COP26, and to begin really with a question that relates to so many issues surrounding that conference. And the question is pretty simple. What has the ADB been doing in preparation for COP26, towards COP26? And what will the bank do in terms of support and throwing its support behind projects that will help achieve the Paris Accords?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Leo. Needless to say, COP26 of this year is such an important meeting for Asia and the Pacific, and we are committed to continuing to help our developing member countries, DMCs, achieve their Paris Agreement commitments. But in addition to that, let me offer 5 examples of ADB's own initiatives vis-a-vis COP26. Firstly, ADB is fully committed to align every operation with the goals of the Paris Agreement. We will achieve full alignment of our sovereign operations with the goals by 1st July 2023. And we will ensure full alignment of our non-sovereign operations by 1st July 2025. That's my our first example. And secondly, we also set very ambitious stretch targets for climate change financing. We introduced two targets. The first target says 75% of the number of our committed operations will have climate change components, either adaptation or mitigation, by 2030. And secondly, climate finance from ADB's own resources, excluding co-financing, excluding trust funds financing, we reach $80 billion cumulatively from 2019 to 2030 for those 12 years. If you divide $80 billion by 12 years, you will come up with $6.7 billion per year. That's our average, annual average targets vis-a-vis the global commitment of $100 billion per year. Thirdly, ADB seeks to double its annual average adaptation and resilience financing in 2021 to 2024 compared to 2015 to 2018. This will result in cumulative financing of $9 billion in adaptation from 2019 to 2024. This is based on the argument that we should invest more in adaptation, compared with mitigation. So we just respond to that kind of request by setting this $9 billion target. Fourthly, we are now finalizing our new energy policy. Our current energy policy is kind of old. It was introduced as old as in 2009. So we are renewing it to guide our support in this key sector. We expect the policy to be approved by our board of directors before COP29. ADB is aiming for a formal withdrawal from financing new coal power generation completely and supporting a just transition that considers its impacts on people and communities. And finally, fifth, we are also targeting to announce the so-called ETM, which stands for Energy Transition Mechanism, partnership in Southeast Asia with key public and private sector sponsors to achieve early closure of existing coal-fired power plants. Okay, so we decided to withdraw from new coal financing, but also we would like to, promote early retirement of the existing coal power plants. The partnership of ETM will comprise a regional facility for receiving donor and philanthropic resources because we need concessional financing to do so, and a set of pilot ETM funds with commercial sponsors in 1 or 2 selected countries.
Excellent. I wonder, though, having given us an appetite for that, you could give us a little bit more detail on some of the green projects that the ADB has supported in Asia and in the Asia Pacific region. If you could give us a few examples to show what you've been doing, and also what you're doing to increase that number of projects of that type.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Tackling climate change, building climate and disaster resilience, and enhancing environmental sustainability is a really priority in ADB's so-called Strategy 2030, which is our medium-term development strategy. To that end, we are implementing and developing so-called green projects, as you mentioned, across many sectors. For example, 1, in the finance sector, we are supporting the issuance of green bonds, and its outstanding now amounts to about $8.9 billion in our region. Our green bond portfolio specifically targets projects that promote the transition to low carbon and climate resilient growth. Secondly, in the energy sector, in Thailand, for example, a non-sovereign green loan committed this year is to help finance solar and wind power plants and deploy a countrywide electric vehicle charging network. And this green loan was the very first internationally certified climate loan in Thailand. And thirdly, in the transport sector in India, we are supporting the regional rapid transit system network in the national capital region. And this will provide safe, reliable, and high-capacity commuter transit service, which is zero emissions, and will replace many polluting buses and private vehicles. Those are a couple of examples we are doing in green energy.
You mentioned there that you mentioned a little earlier that in some cases the plan that you have has needed updating from a sort of previous version, and I guess one of the areas that I'd like to know a little bit more about is what is the bank's views on the energy outlook, and particularly with this focus that investors and others have, government certainly, on climate change. How have you adapted your views to this very, very fast-moving debate, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, where that debate seems to be played in many different ways?
Okay, energy outlook. Yes, while our region confronts and recovers from the pandemic, we must not lose sight of the continued need to promote sustainable development. Response to the pandemic in the short term and our support to long-lasting and sustainable recovery are not mutually exclusive, I believe, or they complement each other, actually. So climate change remains the existential challenge of our life. Asia and the Pacific region now accounts for 36% of global GDP, which is great, with great progress in poverty reduction as well. But it is also responsible for around 80% of the world coal consumption and up to 60% of CO2 emissions. So now is the time for bold action. We must commit to fighting climate change, including meeting the emission reduction goals under the Paris Agreement. So in the energy sector, we need to make major changes so as to put the region's development on a green path. These include a couple of things. First, reducing the use of fossil fuels and switching to low carbon fuels. Second, deploying more renewable energy. Third, improving energy efficiency. And fourth, reducing final energy demand. And fifth, incentivizing investment in low carbon technologies. ADB is ready to take on a leadership role in Asia and the Pacific in meeting these commitments. We aim at stepping up our climate finance, as mentioned before, and capacity building efforts to help our developing member countries, DMCs, achieve their nationally determined contributions, NDCs.
Thank you. One of the subjects that exercise a lot of economists and a lot of investors and so on is this question of green economic recovery and whether it's achievable, in useful time frames. What's your opinion on the whole debate about green economic recovery, and how do you think it can be achieved?
The scale and the nature of the policy decisions are being made now will crucially affect climate and biodiversity outcomes far into the future. As our economies reopen and rebuild, we need to ensure that the new normal is sustainable. So we need to transform our economies and the development pathways to be greener, less wasteful, more inclusive, and more resilient. To design a green recovery, which you mentioned, we need to embrace two fundamental ideas. Firstly, that green recovery does not necessarily mean additional costs for the economy. Secondly, that a green economy is not about isolated green measures or investments, but rather a holistic package of actions and investments that together achieves multiple objectives. So at ADB, we recognize that the benefits of green recovery are strongly linked to the overall operational priorities of our Strategy 2030. I have made support for green, resilient, and inclusive recovery a key priority of my planning directions. We are helping our DMCs integrate green, resilient, inclusive recovery measures into their recovery plans, including leveraging existing policy processes and frameworks, such as the Paris Agreement, of course, and SDGs.
I wanted to ask my own interest, how are you building an expertise in that area? Asukawa-san, how is the ADB building an expertise in that rather complicated area?
Well, this is complicated and sometimes a bit technical, but climate change has been, our, top priority for years now. It's one of the, most prioritized area in our Strategy 2030. And we have, accumulated enough expertise in the institution. And now we are facing COP26 and we are revising our energy policy and so on. So we are ready to take any bold actions to achieve our, goals in this area.
Very good, very good. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll now the one of the sort of foremost reputations that the ADB has is the work that it's done and the projects that it's supported that have been primarily focused over the years and over the decades on tackling extreme poverty. We are having this conference at a time of some uncertainty surrounding the global COVID-19 pandemic, different levels of vaccination and different levels of infection in the various countries that are on the ADB's watch. I wonder, Asukawa-san, what do you see as the biggest social and economic challenges that you and the ADB will confront, I guess, in what we might call the post-COVID era, although nobody really knows when that will properly begin?
Yeah, actually, poverty reduction is another top priority area for ADB, together with climate change and gender issues and so on. And I'd say, there are many uncertainties, about this pandemic. But one thing which is clear is that as a result of this pandemic, the poverty situation will surely get worse, deteriorate. And actually, COVID-19 has reversed much of the region's poverty reduction progress. Over the past 20 years, developing Asia averaged 6.6% GDP growth. And as a result, we made rapid progress in reducing extreme poverty. The number of people living on less than 1.9 per day fell by 83%, from 1.2 billion people in 1999 to 200 million people in 2017. Now, the pandemic has halted Asia's progress, wreaking havoc on poor communities. The large drops in economic activity in 2020 pushed an estimated 80 million more people into extreme poverty. To address this increase in poverty is no doubt the main social and economic challenge in the post-COVID-19 era. So key risks will change over time in the shift towards recovery from COVID-19. And as such, the response of the DMCs needs to change as well. First, during the very initial emergency phase with stringent lockdowns, government's priorities were to support demand and job retention through a wide range of social protection programs, right? And fiscal measures, including cash transfers and wage subsidies. Secondly, in the current transition period, there are still periods of lockdown, but the economy is better prepared to respond in a more balanced way. However, vulnerable groups will still need targeted support and time to bounce back. And thirdly, during the post-COVID-19 recovery period, the emphasis will need to be on getting people vaccinated, as you mentioned, reactivating the economy, and getting those who lost their jobs during the crisis back to work through retaining and job facilitation. This will be needed to revamp the economies, but also to support vulnerable households. One of the key challenges here is to strengthen so-called domestic resource mobilization, DRM, namely to raise more tax revenue to ensure there are sufficient resources, financial resources available to support the recovery.
Asakawa-san, I can't tell whether when you say this, and these are very big challenges, are you optimistic about the ability of the ADB to help alleviate these challenges and to meet these challenges? I can't tell how optimistic you are on this.
Well, I cannot be too optimistic, but as I mentioned to you, this is one of the core missions of ADB, poverty reduction and so on. And over years, before this pandemic broke out, we have been observing, kind of very, very rapid reduction of poverty in this area, thanks to the high growth, economic growth rate and so on. But again, due to this pandemic, situation got worsened. So, we have no other choice rather than, tackle this as quickly as possible, together with climate change issues and also gender issues and also infrastructure and so on. But this really, poverty reduction issue is one of the topest priority for us.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're running a little bit tight on time, but I'd like to ask you one more question, if I may, which is the big question. You, of course, began this by talking about the COP26, but more broadly, how can the bank help Asia and the Pacific achieve sustainable growth and development? Those are the sort of the key words in investment these days, and fascinated to hear your view from the top of the ADB about how you can achieve sustainable growth and development.
Yeah, Leo, this is really comprehensive, overarching question. So let me highlight, concretely 5 areas that I believe are very important for developing Asia to recover from the pandemic and create a more green, inclusive, and resilient future. First, we need to deepen our regional cooperation and integration. I am of a view that globalization will come back after this pandemic is over. People might have different view, but this is my view. Then we should ensure that DMCs, our development member countries, can seize the opportunities of renewed globalization by further promoting our open regionalism. So ADB is helping our DMCs enhance regional trade and investment diversifying supply chains, regional supply chains to complement global supply chain, and strengthening regional health security. Second, we have to address inequality as we discussed, including gender inequality, which has worsened due to this pandemic. We will focus on human capital investment and social protection. This investment, for example, in the sector of education and health, will surely help poor, vulnerable people to participate in the recovery process, growth process, development process by securing them high-quality jobs. Thirdly, we will promote a green infrastructure as economies rebuild. These investments can boost economic activity and generate jobs, while also strengthening our climate resilience and mitigating the impact of climate change. And fourthly, we will help harness the benefit of digitalization. The pandemic accelerated the transition to the digital economy. To capitalize on this, Asia must enhance digital infrastructure while closing the digital divide and safeguarding cybersecurity. Last but not least, we must strengthen domestic resource mobilization, which I mentioned. Tax revenue to GDP ratio has been low in the Asia-Pacific region compared with other regions in the world. So pandemic deteriorated this situation and underscored the need for sustainable tax revenues. Governments must close potential tax loopholes, including those arising from the digitalization of the economy, and they must implement other reforms to better tap the domestic resources needed for sustainable growth, effective response to future crises, and achievement of SDGs.
Well, Asuka-san, thank you very, very much indeed for that. There's never been a time where the ADB and the countries that it operates in have not been facing huge challenges, and this is obviously one of them. But the insights that you give, at least, I think, provide a sense of hope that that there are approaches that have been considered and ways through some of these challenges. So, Asuka-san, it remains for me just to thank you very, very much again for taking your time to answer those questions and to lay out in such detail what the ADB's view of the world is. So, thank you so much again.
Thank you, Leo, and take care, everybody.